So I'm going to start with an anecdote, and it was one, not necessarily the one I was planning on starting with. I was on my way over here, and I don't know if this is like many of you, I could absolutely be projecting. I was on my phone, and I was on my phone because when I was in my office, I was doing interviews and checking my email and doing other things, and my break time was between my office and Hickory. And so I was walking across the street on my phone, and one of my alumni, who I of course didn't see because I was on my phone, jumped out of her car and ran up beside me and said hello, and it kind of alarmed me, and I realized that I wasn't being very present. And she said, I turned notifications off on my phone so I could have better balance. And I was like, well, that's really funny. I'm on my way to talk about work-life balance. And like everybody in my life right now, when I said that I was doing this, including my dean, they laughed at me. And this student said, Allison, you have to tell this story. And I thought, well, so part of it is, yeah, I think there is something humorous. And maybe we're all feeling rather similarly, or maybe that's why you're sitting here, and I'll find out why you're sitting here. But what is this thing called work-life balance, and why is it so humorous to those of us that are perceived to not have it, right? And so I'm assuming that's why people laugh. I'm good with that. I've laughed myself. But yeah, so I think, so that's what we're going to talk today about. And maybe work on dispelling some of the myths around it, and maybe reframe what it means. So here is your task. For about 3 minutes, I'm going to have you talk about a couple things. The first is why you're here. Right? This is the middle of summer. Aren't you supposed to be off? Or are there other more important things you could do? There's a reason why you're sitting here. Why are you here? The second thing is what do you think you do well in balance? And as you can imagine, my third question, so why are you here? What do you do well? And anyone want to guess what the third question would be?
What do you do poorly?
What do you do poorly? What do you need to work on? What are your growing edges? However we want to frame it. So those are the 3 questions. And I want you to make sure that you take some equal time and space and be mindful of that as you're talking in your dyads and triads. So give you 2 or 3 minutes. I'll listen for the volume. And if you're all staring at me, I'll assume you're done talking. All right, go ahead. I'm going to hear from a few people. Definitely don't need to hear from everyone. But a few people want to share why you're here. It may be related to the other 2 questions I asked. What are some of the reasons that folks are here?
I kind of talked about how being a junior faculty, there's this expectation to say yes to every committee and every research group, and this chase for tenure. So trying to get some ideas on how to maybe learn to say no when I can, and find the areas of balance that may be available to someone who's on that quest.
Yep. Thank you. Go ahead, Lisa.
Well, this year has been particularly challenging for me as a student. I mean, an employee, full-time employee, but also as a student and grad student, as well as being present in my family and my relationship. And so trying to manage all of that in one full-fledged year, and then now kind of winding down. During that course of the year, I learned to say, I kept saying yes to a lot of things, to a lot of committees, and trying to be committed to the work that I do here on college campus, but also trying to be mindful of my time and self-care. And so now that I'm winding down towards the end of my grad program, I'm finding myself like, ooh, I have a lot of time, I can join things, and I'm like, Kelly, just appreciate the moment, just be and be present. So I think with this workshop in particular, I'm hoping that I can just kind of be okay with not having a lot of things on my plate, but also keep learning, keep benefiting from all of that.
Thank you.
Liz and I both love you, Allison, so that's why we're here.
Thank you.
We too struggle with work-life balance and saying yes and that sort of thing. So we both recently received promotion and tenure in promotion. So that's very exciting. We've never been on a 5-year substitution now.
A cycle.
Probationary period. Probationary period of 5 years. So that was new. But what I really liked what Liz said was really, we talked about not only balance, but being in rhythm. And what she said was she went to a workshop, and this was very profound, I really liked it, of not getting overwhelmed, but getting too whelmed. So I really like that, being whelmed as opposed to being overwhelmed. And prioritizing what's really important.
Yeah. So is there anyone here, like I'm just gonna ask you generally, the other two questions were, what do you do well and what do you struggle with? But I'm just gonna have you on a show of hands, 5 being like, I rock this work-life balance, I have it together. 1 being, not quite, at all, no way. When you announce that you're doing work-life balance thing, people laugh. So where would you be, everybody on show hands? Okay, 2, 3, 1, 2. Okay, beautiful. So 3s, you're feeling like you're kind of managing, but there's days that probably aren't so good. It's seeing that stuckness, and anyone below a 3 would be in what the failing percentile. And that's actually what I learned, as I was coming together with this and sorting through, when you asked me if I would do this, I said, well, I don't know that I have the same perception as others. Definitely not of the folks that tried to mentor me when I first came to the college. I think I was always accused of being out of balance, or people would want to take care of me and tell me not to take more on, and I always felt frustrated that there were assumptions being made about me, and I struggled with that. And so as I was trying to reconceptualize this idea of work-life balance, I did a little bit of research. And I found that most of us actually feel like we fail at it, and we fail at it for a couple reasons. The first being, it is completely on the binary, right? And so we're learning these days that we really shouldn't think about anything as a binary existence. Work or life. You could choose which way to turn. One or the other. Or it's a scale, right? And you either are balancing work well, or you're balancing life well. It's kind of a bit of a setup. And so no wonder 3/4 of you in here, if we were to convert 5 to a grade scale, most of you feel like you're failing at this work-life balance thing. But you're sitting here, and you're generally content people trying to sort through how to navigate this. So the other thing I found is that we actually, the idea of work-life balance is the assumption that work, career, and business is on one side, and life and family and health are on the other side. Again, interesting balance, right? So when we hear about work-life balance, we're like, we can either do these things or these things, or we have to try to figure out that they are on separate planes, right? And we're trying to navigate it by hanging out there in the middle. And last I found, because I was having too much fun, this is also how the internet perceives work-life balance, because I had to throw something in there that points out men get to balance work and fun, and women, we get to balance work and cleaning and baby carrying, which isn't necessarily representative, but this is how we conceptualize work-life balance and why so many of us feel like we fail miserably at it. So yes, this was, as I was looking through, and then the last thing I found, because I could not find men's life that might include children, so that definitely doesn't describe our faculty here and the folks that are present in the room, and I just think, that may not be balance I'd be seeking. You might want to talk to my partner about that. So yeah, none of it necessarily fits, and so there we go. That's what we're striving for, and that's why we all feel so incredibly successful at it. The last thing is everything, there's hacks. So you can become a work-life balance hack, and you can figure out ways to shortcut so that you can at least pretend that you achieve, because hacking means you don't really do it, you just act as if you do. And does that feel better if you're acting as if you've got it figured out, or does it feel like you just found some corner to cut and a hack in doing it? And I actually didn't read these because it's less relevant, but this is about hacking our way through it. And I don't think any of you are here because you want to find a hack or a shortcut. I don't think any of you are here necessarily because you want to learn what you do really poorly or that you're a failure at work-life balance, but you're here as we try to sort it out. And so as I was thinking more about it, I thought, is there a different way? And this is something I've been conceptualizing probably since I started in higher ed. And it could be from a history of being a very busy person like I imagine most of you are. And I remember my first job before I came to Springfield. The chair that hired me would constantly remind me not to be overworked. He told me that he would protect me, which feels really icky to me right now as I repeat it. But there was this sense that somehow, if I worked too hard or became too engaged, that I would burn myself out. I even looked through some of my first evaluations at Springfield College, and even though they were glowing, that was consistently something that was written by my department chair: be careful, Allison, or you will burn yourself out. And I remember sitting with that with such frustration, because what are you saying? I'm not supposed to do these things? How am I supposed to do my job with this constant fear that I'm going to burn myself out? And I am guessing some of you have heard that in here too. Oftentimes from well-intended mentors who they themselves might feel like a complete failure in work-life balance, which we know now we all are, right? Like if there's a binary, none of us are going to be successful at it. So what if we could reconceptualize it? And I think that's been where I've come. And this is also the advice that I tell new faculty when they're coming in. But sometimes we have to figure out, like, how can we integrate our life? And so is there another way where we could talk more about how different parts of our life could integrate well together? Now, I'll never forget, I was out one night at dinner with someone, and she said, I don't know how you and your husband can even spend time together, because you all both are in the field of education. I have to live with someone who has a completely different world so that we don't talk about it at home. And I thought, well, great, that works for you. Something that works for me is I live with someone who I can talk to my work about, and we can jump in. But we each find our own way. Her integration or balance was finding someone who didn't share the same interests. And mine is being with someone who does, right? That was pretty lucky. So what if we can imagine that there's different parts of our life that are integrated? What if our work accomplishments are not at the expense of, but because of the other things in our life? And so I think back to why I love what I do. And I think, bottom line here, you will never hear me say anything about the work that isn't positive. I love teaching. I love working with students. I love most parts of my job. And why I love my job is because I figured out how to make it me. I figured out how to integrate what I do into who I am. I've been here, this will be my 20th year starting in September, and it kind of feels like that. But from day one when I came here, I knew that whatever I did on campus was going to be something meaningful to me. I'm not going to jump on committees because somebody says it's going to benefit me or it's an easy one. And I had all sorts of that when I came here. I had all sorts of advice I will never repeat to you except in jest. This is an easy committee, get on it, it'll get you towards tenure. Well, why would you do something you don't love? We spend enough of our days doing things we kind of don't like that much, but we do because parts that are connected to it we love, right? So, we need to think more about integrating. What if work commitments at home and the community and other parts of our lives complemented our work, right? And when you guys think about the things that you do at work or at home that you like, my guess is there's not a line down the middle. They're not completely separate events. They're a part of who you are and part of what you do. And what if our fulfillment is found in doing more of what we love in all aspects of our lives? And so, so what? So the idea of work-life integration came out of the field of positive psychology, which I didn't really know. I didn't even know there was a word for it until I started to think a little bit about, is there a better way? Is there a better way for us to think of things not necessarily like the balance, but more as like a puzzle or a gears or whatever it might be? That of course there's going to be things that are at home, at the gym, or travel or leisure. But maybe they're all much more integrated than being completely binary. And I think maybe as you guys sit there, you think about the things that you have appreciated most in your job. And somehow they're connected to who you are and what you do and what you love to do, right? If we're told that you have to have this balance thing and you're trying to separate your life into these tiny little boxes, they're not there. So you're going to constantly feel like a failure. I mean, how many people in here have felt like they've completely failed? You're trying to do too much and you don't feel like you do anything well, right? You just feel spread way too thin. And part of that is the setup that we have that you're supposed to do. In counseling, we teach people about self-care. And those of us that teach it are probably if we look at self-care, how it's been traditionally defined as taking time for yourself, most of us aren't that great about it. But what if self-care, what if balance, what if integration were more about doing things that we loved and embracing those things and not resenting them because they are something we might get paid to do? Like, what a luxury! Not everybody in this world gets paid to do what they love, right? Now, not all things, I know. Come by my office some days. But what gets me through is the fact that I love what I do. So this idea of work-life integration is that it's binary and not competitive, right? There's enough stuff in our life that's competitive, but when we hear words, like I was listening as you guys describe things you wanted, use the word chase. Like I felt it, like how exhausting that chase for tenure. How exhausting that you're feeling like you're being pulled in multiple directions, or you use words like manage, like that's something we can do with time that isn't a real thing, but it is something, and then we feel like we fail at it because we're asking ourselves to do the absolute impossible, right? So what if it is not binary? What if it's synergistic? What if all areas in life are one? What if we focus on our strengths, our passions, our commitments, and our interests, and thinking about it actually being possible? Now, so how does that translate here? I'm going to ask you that in a minute as we get a little bit more, because I think it can. I think there are plenty of opportunities on a college campus to do things you love to do, to be connected to things you love to be connected with. You know, I think about even decisions that I've made in home life, right? Like it is, we have the luxury of being in an institution where I think it's okay that you have family and free time and you can enjoy them, right? And I also think that it's a really cool opportunity for that to be a part of this place as well. So if that works for you. So it is possible. I think the key is that it's individualized. Each of us needs to think about it. I think about my friend who said, my husband and I can't do anything the same. It would drive me crazy. That's fine. That may be you. You might want to go home and never talk to your partner about work. Don't know what I'd talk about, so maybe that's a problem. But we have I live with a person who's in education, not in this education, but we live relatively parallel lives in the work that we do, and we share the same passions, and I feel really lucky about that. But that works for me. It may not work for everybody. It's absolutely strengths-based. So I wish I could say somebody told me this, but I think I just sorted through it as I was so, I'm very, I'm like an empath, is that right? So I feel things. And I remember when people would tell me don't overwork, don't get burned out. I'm like, it just was so unsettling. Physically, it felt awful. That one, people were telling me what to do, but no, what not to do, not what to do. And two, it didn't align at all with the way I viewed the world, right? For me, I had to figure out a way to integrate it. And so for me, I thought about what my strengths are. What are things that I am really good at? What are things I'm not good at? Probably want to stay away from those things. I'm not particularly, I shouldn't say this, I'm a department chair, detail-oriented, as Shelley knows. I'm a big picture thinker. I love change, I love to move things through, but it's like learning about those things. So sitting on a committee where we're playing with words would be like somebody, I just would be pulling my fingernails off. I would not put myself there. Now, if I can be, most of my work on this campus has been the lecture, being on committees that are kind of change agents, being somewhere where we get to envision new ideas and stuff. And there are people here who their strength is to be detail-oriented, to wordsmith, to hammer out those details that aren't my strength at all. So think about what your strengths are and find things that you do well. Do not set yourself up to do something you don't do well. It's a nightmare. Then that's not balance. That's usually when you feel burned out. When you're doing something that you're constantly wondering, and believe me, I know there's faculty and staff and all sorts of folks in this room. I think all of us have that shared experience that, I don't know, maybe I'm projecting, but I still think people are going to figure out that I shouldn't be here, that I don't belong here, and that I don't know anything. Is that a shared experience? Okay. So this is, why would I set myself up to be in a situation where I'm constantly fearing that I'm not going to know how to do something, right? There's plenty I know how to do and know well. I'm not saying don't push it, right? But there are lots of opportunities to think about. So this gets to what Elizabeth had talked about, that sweet spot, right? So I also believe that we have to find that space where we're perfectly challenged and perfectly uncomfortable, because then we're truly alive, right? If we're just moving and going through the motions, there is just, like, I don't know if it's a deadness, it's a little existential, but we're alive when we're in some state of anxiety. We're alive when we're in some state of dissonance. But if we're just passively floating through, we're probably not going to be finding rewards or benefits from what we do. So that sweet spot is finding that place where you're perfectly challenged, where you're whelmed, not overwhelmed, right? And then I think the other piece of this is accepting that paradox, right? So some of my students will ask, like, how do you know about self-care? How do you figure out boundaries in counseling? And I'm one of those people that says you usually learn because you make a mistake. If you're bumping up against that line, if there is a line, even though it might be really blurry, you're probably exactly where you need to be. The paradox is, if you're there, if you think you're there, you're probably not. And if you're working to get there, you're probably exactly where you need to be. It's like, you know, you have to be on that treadmill. You have to keep moving to stay in that space of work-life integration. So it takes work to be there, because if you're passive about it, chances are you're not necessarily integrating. It's not natural, it's not celebrated, and oftentimes it's laughed at. I'm learning. All right, so I'm going to have you, now that you have your groups, you guys have chit-chatted a bit, I'm going to have you jump back in. And I'm going to have you, oops, that's not where I wanted to go. I'm going to have you answer a couple questions. The first being, what do you think your strengths are? So I gave a couple examples of mine, but they're definitely not to, like, you know, tell you to draw a red flower. Your strengths could be anything. You know, it could be relation-oriented, it could be whatever things you think you're good at. What are your strengths, right? And so that's the first thing, answer what your strengths are. And then how would you know if you're in that sweet spot? Some of you may not be able to answer that, but have you been there? And if you have, how do you know? Okay? So one's very concrete. What are your strengths? And then the second piece is about that sweet spot, or how would you know when you're whelmed? Okay? Go ahead. So I'm going to hear from you, and we can learn from each other, because I think there's lots and lots of good ideas in here that kind of came out of the conversations. And so just groups could share kind of either where their conversations went or what ideas came out as you were talking about either your strengths and or that sweet spot. So who would like to, or ideas that they figured out to kind of challenge this idea of balance. What were some of the things you talked about? You're all talking, so just looking at me like someone, thank you.
So in thinking about integration, one of the, you know, as you mentioned, when you're a new faculty member or new to whatever, people give you all this advice. But I would say the best advice that I received and that has helped with the sweet spot in regards to being a faculty member is what I teach about, what my scholarship is, and how I serve. They are all around the same issues and topics. So then that way, you know, I can say no to this particular committee because it does not align with what I teach about, what I write about, and vice versa. So keeping those three areas centered around the same kind of my own personal philosophy, what have you, has been helpful. So then that way, when I go to this meeting, it will be valuable because it's on something that I teach about or write about. When I sit down to write and or read, it will be of value, it will influence my teaching, I can bring it to the next meeting. So that has been a sweet spot and probably the best advice that I've ever.
And I think too, as you talk about it, it's not just they're things that you do well in your study, but they're things that are also meaningful to you
Yes.
and you're passionate about.
Yes.
So it ignites that, right? And you mentioned your personal philosophy, so it's not like this is just work stuff.
Correct.
It is you stuff
Yes.
that connects, right? It doesn't have to, you don't have to be completely blurry, but there is that important connection that it makes it meaningful and relevant. and efficient, which I get cautious using, but there is a reality that there are times when we need to be efficient as well, right? So I love all the feely stuff, but there's something incredibly efficient about that as you're in that chase, right? Other things that folks share. Thank you, Stephanie.
Just going off of the notion of advice, the best advice I got as a student starting my professional career was to look for workspaces that are culture fit, because you can do tasks anywhere. So you might do the tasks that you envisioned yourself doing or that you enjoy, but if you're doing them in an environment that's not a culture fit, you're never going to thrive and you're never going to like what you do, as opposed to doing new tasks that you may not have envisioned for yourself, or developing new skill sets that you may have in the past said, I can't do that, or I don't know how to do that, or that's not my discipline. But if it's a culture fit and you have mentors that are going to encourage you and you're in a workspace that helps to develop and grow you, then you're going to thrive no matter what you're doing. So I think the notion of doing the best at whatever you're doing is dependent upon where we put ourselves to do that. So if you identify kind of thematically or not, I think a lot of it has to do with doing it in a culture that suits you, because to me that's the key to work-life integration. Like if you're in a culture that allows you to thrive and develop, you're going to be a happier professional and you're going to be a happier human person beyond that.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And so sorting through, how do you identify that culture? Is there a way to create it? Have we misread the other culture, right? And so I think about my first few years here, I just decided to put my earplugs in and tune it out and create my own culture, but I had the luxury of doing it because there was enough space elsewhere on this campus for me to find that place. So it's finding that balance. You're exactly right. And that makes a difference between tasks, as you said, and things that you are actually going to learn from and benefit doing. Thank you. Other things that folks talked about. So how many of your strengths align with your passions? Talked a lot about that. How many of you find your strengths align with the things that you care about? If you don't care about anything, just more thinking about what you care about. It doesn't all have to be the same stuff. But what we do sure as heck should be meaningful to us. We have to tap into that. It can't just be that we slog away at work all day and then try to figure out what we love to do in the evenings, right? And there's days that might be like that. But if we're having both of those met the majority of the time, it's easier for the slog on those days that don't feel so good. What other thoughts did folks have as you shared it about your strengths? We're in that sweet spot.
So I kind of liked what you said about the sweet spot, having being in a state where you're always kind of looking for the next step, and I find myself in that place where if once the end of this project happens, then I'll be able to do such and such, or I'll be able to kind of look back and kind of have a satisfaction kind of feeling. But in some sense, I never feel like I have that. I never feel like I'm able to kind of look back, or even like I've heard, like being in the moment or being in the present, right? And so part of me is like, I agree with that being the sweet spot, so therefore maybe I'm in the sweet spot. But on the other hand, it seems a little chaotic too. Like it could be kind of go out of control in a sense.
Well, you're probably right on the edge of that.
Right. And yeah, well, maybe that, yeah.
And I think that's the challenge, right? And maybe that is getting it back into that idea of, well, hopefully you're on the edge of it to a point where you can find some calmness in it eventually, right? But I think the difference between us thinking about it being in a balance, like if anyone, I have a master's in PE, and I remember being on like the stabiliometer as one of the novel tests and assessments, and that being like, that's how the balance feels to me. And like you're constantly, or if you've ever been on a boat, is it a bosu ball? Yeah, same thing. You're like, right? So that's how it could feel. That's that chaotic feeling. But what if we just kind of stepped off that balance, right? And we're able to kind of rebuild it in a way that didn't feel so binary, that felt like it was about fitting pieces together. Not everything fits all the time. But so it's like, I know I'm changing the metaphor a bit, but that imbalance does feel chaotic. It feels like you're in a constant static state of like tension. I don't like that either, right? But I do think, I'm guessing most of you are here because you're more tense than less most of the time. You're not seeking passivity, right? You're seeking productivity, but more like your
Engagement.
Engagement, yeah. Like none of you want to be bored at work. Maybe you do. But I don't think that's why you're here. And I think part of your struggle, why you chose to be here, is that you tend to be people who are always moving. So how do we find comfort in that movement rather than thinking that somehow we're failing when we're there? So I don't know.
I
Yeah.
think that also ties into purpose. So think about, especially for me, like graduating, getting my degree and being in this position for going on 3 years, I'm like, well, what's next? What do I do next? How can I prepare myself more? And so this year, and I think at this point, when I'm near the end of my program, I'm like, it's okay to just be and to just do, you know, and see where life takes you. And I think that purpose, and I struggle with that too. So that's finding that work-life balance and that balance, chaotic feeling.
Well, there's also that difference between doing and being, right? So we can be and be curious and be and have inquiry, but we don't always have to do. It's like my students that'll call, I've got 4 degrees and I want another one. I'm like, how about you just be? You can ask questions, you can read on your own, you don't need another $50,000 of debt. I don't say that, there's no admissions people here. But being is an okay thing to do. It's that being and doing. We don't have to do something to stay curious, to stay motivated, to keep growing. Elizabeth, your hand popped up earlier.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about the sort of chaoticness, and I kept using the word precipice as we were talking about this, and I feel like I'm always on the precipice, but I don't think it's always that tense or anxious for me. I think when it gets to that tension or anxiety, that's actually, I appreciate that, because that's when I start saying no. That's when that 6th peer-reviewed journal article comes in, and I'm like, you know what? I know I'm on the editorial board, but I'm not doing this one because I'm not interested in it. Whereas when I only have 2 on my plate, I might say yes to the 3rd, and then I feel bad because I said yes and I should have said no, and then I get all beating up myself. But when I'm on that, that's when I'm like, no, Karen, I'm not going to do this, you know, or the other requests. So when I feel myself leaning too far in that uncomfortable place, I appreciate that sometimes because I feel then that I actually have the ability. I give my permission to say no, and so it's that constant act of leaning there and then pulling back and then getting back into that spot and then pulling back and then getting back into that spot. So that over edge is helpful. So
And not beating yourself up that you get there,
Yeah.
right? Like, so I think that's part of this is we need to stop worrying so much about that there's no golden bullet, there's no like perfect answer to this. It's finding comfort in discomfort. And yeah. And any other thoughts or comments about that? Okay. Do I have anything else here I wanted to? Okay, so I want you to ask yourself, these are the questions you have to ask yourself as you do this and you sort through it. And this, I mean, Elizabeth, you nailed it. There's going to be times when you'll do something that may not be completely meaningful because you have the space in your world to integrate it in. But I think that's exactly right. When you get full, that's when you're able to decipher what is most important. What am I going to learn the most or get the most from? So how do I find meaning and fulfillment? What do I like to do? What do I want to learn more about? And how can I make meaning out of this? I mean, I think that the last one might be like when we're stuck doing things that we don't absolutely love to do. What can we learn from it? What can we take away from it? And I know that folks in here spread the range of time on campus. And some of you are tenured, some aren't, some of you that's not even in the realm of what you do. But I think part of this integration is also about staying alive in our job. I mean, if I hustled to get tenure and then I thought I was done, I would be miserable. And so I think it's also this like, how do we continue to stay alive and engaged and curious and doing the work that got us into this place in the beginning. And I think it is about living, right? So what we do in our work should be meaningful in some way. And when it's not, how do we find meaning in it? So it doesn't just feel like you're out of whack for no reason at all. So you have to be authentic and clarify, and I think that's part of it. So thinking about that passion, that authenticity. work with integrity to recognize different parts of your life, all of those things and how they affect each other. Again, there's going to be times where I remember when and so we were just talking about, I have 2 daughters who have grown up here. I think they've been to every imaginable sporting event and play or whatever has been going on, and they just both graduated from college, which is absolutely unbelievable. But as I raised them, they were pretty integrated. In fact, as we went to look at colleges, they're like, well, we want like red brick buildings, and like, no, you're describing not that I didn't want them to come here, but that's Springfield College. But like so integrated. And I think in good ways. I also think there was a time, if any of you were here when my children were in high school, I coached a high school swim team for 5 years. What started as, Allison, will you help out? We just need someone. And somehow, I look back now and I think, how the heck did I do that, coach soccer, coach swimming, run a program with all these students? But you do it because that was what my life called for at that point in time, and that's what made it was fully integrated. I learned more standing on a pool deck with kids from the Renaissance School than I probably was going to learn sitting in my office at 3 o'clock every day. And how could I integrate what I was doing there into the work that I did here? I think it was fitting it all together. Again, at a time when people are like, just don't overextend yourself. I extended myself. And by extending myself, I was more connected to my community. I was more alive when I was here and more focused, right? And yeah, there were days I was worn out, but it was probably worth it because most of what I did in my life I loved. And I think the last thing is it allows you to be a little innovative. So when I look back through, this is actually my review year, so once you're tenured, every 3 years you go through a review, and I was looking at all the service things I've done, and I've been really, really lucky to find things on this campus that I'm passionate and excited about. There's a few things that I've done that I thought would be really exciting, and ended up not being as exciting as I imagined, but I stuck through it. And then there's also the opportunity, if you are well extended, to try to be innovative and creative about what you do. We do have some luxuries on this campus that maybe you don't at an R1 institution, that maybe you don't at other places where the workload is just unbearable. And so I think it is trying to make the most of that. I wish I had the best advice I ever got. I hope that I give better advice than I got to new faculty coming in. The absolute best part of working at Springfield College, and I'm in the process of interviewing right now people, and they all say, what do you love about it? Why are you at Springfield College? When I came here 19 years ago, I never imagined I'd be here that long. I was a person that was 3 and out wherever I went, and I don't think it was because people didn't like me. It was by choice. Although, I just like to move. I never imagined that I'd put roots down. But I did here because I used a lot of these strategies. So when I arrived on campus, I got involved with students. That's why I'm here. That's what I love to do. I got engaged in service activities that were meaningful and fulfilling to me, that integrated with my beliefs and the things I care deeply about. And it also made my whole job so much more exciting. When I see faculty that come to work, go home, come into work the next day, teach their classes, have their office hours, the door's closed otherwise. I mean, it's annoying as a department chair, but it's actually sad on what they might be missing out on in the opportunity if they just opened up their heart or opened up a little bit more, became a little bit more a part of this place. I know it has its flaws, but I think it is that kind of integration that makes our jobs way more reasonable. There's no question I would have been burned out if I only did what I was told. So all these people telling me what to do and warning me about being burned out and protecting me from it, had I done all they'd said, I wouldn't be here. There's no way I'd still be here. But it was because I chose to do things that I really cared about. And yep, my colleagues can attest, there are days when I fall over the edge. But there are also things that I can reel myself back in because I care about them. Right? So yeah, any last words or thoughts, because we have lots and lots of experience here. Things that you have done that in your time here, things that questions you have, thoughts you have. Any newer folks have questions?
I have a comment.
Yeah.
So the very first summer I was here, you were a trainer. You were doing universal design. And this good woman, who's with Professional and Continuing Study, said that she's committed to lifelong learning, and that's one thing. And so the fact that you keep doing this over and over, I appreciate it, because I'm a beneficiary of this training, this education.
Thank you. Well, and I remember you were your first year on campus, and that idea that I got to do that. That was one of those things that, so it might be too much on your plate, but I cared about it, and it was fun, and I got to meet people and connect. And I think for me, it's about relationships and community, and if I can do that in my work, then it's all worthwhile. Right? Thank you. All right, well, anytime anyone says work-life balance, remind them it's not a binary. Let's change our language. If we can change our language in other aspects of our life, let's change our language in this. You're setting yourself up to fail, and let's stop being so hard on ourselves. So it's integration. How do we integrate? However you do that. Good luck, and thank you. Have a